Hello dear friends, welcome to Shiksha Mantra. And in Shiksha Mantra today, we are going to discuss something that is very much essential for your learning of English language, and also when you want to produce sentences in English very successfully, you have to do something that is what's your need, what's the need of the situation. You have to understand this and then produce the sentence accordingly. So here today in Shiksha Mantra, we are going to discuss life, the key factor regarding the use of English language, how you can produce a perfect sentence in English. Most of the time what happens, our sentences appear to be very much odd. Sometimes we don't get what actually we mean, and people fail to get the sense of our sentences properly. So what's the factor that lead us to this particular point? So let's ask you two questions. Want to learn the best trick to use English efficiently? So this live is for those only who are serious about learning production of efficient English sentences. And the second is, do you want to flourish? If you want to flourish, here's the thing you must learn and flourish. So this is the only thing to learn to flourish your English sentences. And what's the thing that you need to learn? Yes, this is formal and informal English. Yes, dear friends, most of the time we get these two things mugged up. We produce a formal sentence for an informal situations or an informal sentence for a formal situation. So here we have to get rid of this. We mustn't mix up things. That means we mustn't mix up formal with informal sentences. Now, how does it go? Here we are going to discuss about it in detail. You have to follow each and every detail so that you can get it better. So let's start our discussion regarding formal and informal sentence. At first, we must learn what's the concept. What's the concept of formal and informal? Most of the times, the students of English as second language produce a sentence just following the translation method. It makes their sentences grammatically correct, but don't sound well in many occasions. So when you produce a sentence, you are grammatically correct. You might be grammatically correct, but it doesn't mean that your sentence is successful. For we produce a sentence not for the grammar, but for what? We produce a sentence purely for communication. Yes. So communication is the most important factor. When you produce a sentence, you must remember that your communication must be successful. Without a successful communication, it's very difficult for you to produce a perfect sentence. So first, you must look at the communication purpose of your sentence. If you can communicate what actually you mean, obviously grammar would come eventually to make your sentence grammatically correct as well. So first, go after the purpose. Don't go after how. Go after what first. So this is the concept, and here we must learn another thing. Why do we need to discuss formal and informal English? Why should we learn them? Is there really any need? Do we really need to learn the formal and informal sentences? If there's something that really worthy enough to learn it. If it's not worthy, why would you learn? So we must go up to the concept first and discuss about what and why and how of formal and informal English. Why does it happen? To get this, you must follow an instruction. What's that instruction? When you dream to learn the language well, you must accept a lot of input from the language. So learning of a language, it has a very simple trick. When you want to learn a language, you must acquire it, but accepting what? Many input. So inputs are essential. So what's the input? Obviously the inputs are different types of sentences, different verbs, vocabulary, how to manage and how to express things in that particular language, and that's the input. And here we must consider this input very seriously. For what happens most of the time, we fail to get a perfect input, and also we fail to accept an input perfectly. An input doesn't mean an input. You must accept this accordingly. So how can it be done? Obviously, when you learn English, when you are going to learn English, what do? You read it, you read the language. Very few of our students, or the serious students, they do this. They listen a lot. So with reading exposure, they accept listening exposure as well for English. And here you have to distinguish. Distinguish what? Distinguish these inputs by the situation they are used. So this is the most important. Your sentence must be situational, and your sentence is obviously with some purposes. So what's the purpose of this sentence? So this situation must be understood, and your input must be treated as per the situation. So you'd understand what's going on, why these sentences are produced, and what you'd have to do in future. That's your learning now. So the same sentence can sound different in different situations. Okay? Situation makes a huge impact on your sentences. And this is the most important factor behind learning English or any language, or produce sentences in any language successfully. Yes, just wait. We are going to have it in detail. How are they different? So what's the difference between formal and informal sentences? We are discussing of formal and informal, but we must know their difference now. So where lies the difference? There are, roughly speaking, two basic differences or two basic types of English input. When you get an input in English, it may be either formal or informal. There's no other options. Only two options are there. It would be either formal or informal. So formal English is used in serious texts and situations. For example, in official documents, books, news reports, articles, business lectures, or official speeches. Informal English is used in everyday conversation and in personal letters. So from here you have to get the concept of formal and informal situations first, because I have told you now the input must be judged on the situation. So it's simply situational. So in these situations you have to use formal, and in those situations you have to use informal. So this is the first thing that you must learn. But before going to this, I would like to tell you one thing. When you use conversational English, these are simply informal. But at the same time, in conversation, sometimes we might use formal as well. Suppose you are talking to someone who is very much respected. Suppose you are talking to your headmaster in your school, to your class teacher. Obviously, you won't use informal sentences. Rather, there you'd get formal, though not completely formal. So, sometimes in some situations, our language gets most formal with a touch of informality. So, those would be done by practices as you get adept in it. But just for the beginning, remember, for two different types of situations, you have to put two different types of sentences, formal and informal, though they mean the same. So here we would like to have some example of formal English that you might come across in a book. As the price of $5 was reasonable, I decided to make the purchase without further thought. So this is a sentence which we'd consider as what? As formal. Now, if we produce the same sentence in informal English, how would it look like? Suppose if you heard someone, a young American who is producing this sentence, he would say it was like $5. So I was like, okay. So this is the difference in between formal and informal. Now just consider, if you produce this informal sentence in a formal situations, what effect it would have. And also the vice versa. That means the opposite is also very much important. If you produce this formal sentence into an informal situations like this, it would sound odd. That's why you must maintain this formal and informal business. But what use is there? We have discussed it, that when you are going to learn something, you must learn why it is, what use these have. So we would learn the use of formal and informal. You need to know formal English because the first point, you want to be able to read a book. Second point, you give a business or presentation. Or the third point, write an official letter. So to have these tasks, if you want to produce these things in English, obviously you use formal English. And now where to use informal? Because you want to understand and communicate with English speakers in everyday situations. So communications and understanding, that means speaking and understanding for English. When you deal with English speakers, when you deal with this language, that means conversation, here you have to learn informal English. So conversation and business presentation, these are very different, as you know. Business presentation is a formal occasion, so there your English would be formal, and talking to your friend is an informal situation. That's why your language would be informal. That's the so very simple thing. It doesn't have much to understand, only to learn seriously, and without learning it, you cannot use English properly in your need. Yes, we learn because we need them in many situations, and here we have produced the needs that you might face, and what the sentences would be in these needs we are going to discuss here in our next part. So what's the difference between formal and informal English? Suppose the difference between formal and informal English is not a difference between correct and incorrect, but a difference of what is known as register. So most of the time we consider them as either correct or incorrect, but it's not something about correct or incorrect. You must understand this. This is not something about getting it right or getting it wrong. Rather, this production of sentences, these are rather it's something that you have used in some with some oddity. So actually you get odd and not incorrect. So if you produce a formal in informal occasion, that doesn't mean you are incorrect, grammatically incorrect, or according to sense it's incorrect, but it listens odd. And here we are talking about register. Now what is a register? A register is a variety of language related to a particular subject matter or area of activity. A set of words and expressions as well as syntactical features that may be said to characterize that specific area of language. That's why register are so very important. You have to put your focus on the words, particular expressions, syntactical features are also very much important to detect the formality or informality in a sentence. And we are going to learn all of them gradually, one after another. And if you want to ask any question, if there's any problem that you want to me answer, you may put your question in the comment section. I won't answer it right now. First, I would complete this process of discussion, and then you would answer all your queries. If you have some question, you may ask me in the comment section below. And if you are newcomer, obviously go through my channel and try to find out whether you have some real business here to do to learn English language properly. So let's discuss the registers. What are the registers? There are many registers like technical, academic, mathematical, scientific, etc. So very broadly speaking, we can also speak of a formal and informal register in English. As we are saying formal and informal sentences in English, we can also say formal and informal register in English as well. So difference between formal and informal English, we have started the discussion. We have started one discussion of about 1 point, and now we are going to discuss the second point. Formal English is used in official, literary, academic content, and informal English is used in everyday, personal and conversation. Personal conversations. Yes, this is very much important. Personal conversations, not any conversation. That's what I was talking to you. When you call to a customer care, so the language they produce, those are not informal. It's also conversation, but this conversation is not informal. It's not a personal conversation. It's actually an official conversation. And being official conversation, the situation is formal and not informal. That's why they use formal English, and also they expect you to use formal English as well. So there, he's or the customer care executive, he or she, whatever it may be, talking to you in formal language, and you are producing informal language. It's really sounds very odd. So here you must understand the difference between formal and informal. That is conversation but not personal. So there you'd have to produce formal language. But when you talk to your friends, when you talk to your brother or your parents, obviously this is personal conversation, and here you might get informal with, yes, with a particular limit. For informal language also you have a certain limit to fix. Okay, because your language to your friends and your language to your teacher cannot be the same. There might be differences now. So that's we need to learn, and that is not for English only, but it's actually important. This discussion of formality and informality, it's important for any language. It's not for English only. If you are a speaker of Bengali, of Hindi, or of any other language, whatever language you learn, you must maintain this formality and informality in your language, in your mother tongue, or any other language that you might learn. So this discussion is really very much important for you must remember that most of the time we make this mistake. Informal English means conversation. Yes, it's conversation, but personal conversation, not any conversation. Conversation can also be official. Formal English is used in careful, edited writing when the writer has a lot of time to polish his text. Formal English also occurs in speech, usually when the speaker is saying something that was prepared beforehand, for example, reading the news or delivering an official speech. So that's how formal English goes. It's edited. That means you get much time to work on it. When you produce an essay for your exam or as a homework that you have been given, so you have sufficient time to polish this text, to edit it and produce the finest version according to you. Which one is the finest? The finest version according to your credit. And for these situations we use formal English. And also when we use informal English, it is used in improvised speech. When the speaker is speaking without preparation, as in a conversation in real life or over the phone. So you don't have any preparation. You are not editing anything, but you are producing it live, just like this live session, as we are also producing something live. So here I didn't have any opportunity to have the things edited or prepared. Rather, it's a live session. So live means informal. So when you talk over phone or you talk to your friends or some others in real life, it's obviously informal. And informal English also occurs in writing, usually whenever the writer is writing quickly and without editing. For example, in an internet chat room or in quick personal emails. So this chat room, this one is very much essential for us to understand. And if you follow a chat room, you'd get sufficient input, sufficient registers for your informal English. Yes, for informal English, a chat room is sufficient for input and registers. Though you'd have to learn from many other sources as well. But this is a good example. There you would find a good example of informal English. So, informal English is obviously something that's very interesting, whatever it may be. In formal English, sentences are longer and more complicated. How? Here we have an example. Toyota's US sales bounced back in March as substantial discounts helped to win back customers who had been shaken by the firm's mass safety recalls. This is very much complicated. It's not easy. Here you'd find many complications in this sentence, and this is formal. It's a longer sentence, and when it's an informal sentence, you'd get the things very simple. You'd get the thing shorter. How? Here we have an example. Do you see Toyota's sales figures? Looks like the discounts have actually worked. So a huge distance is there in between these two sentences. Okay, I'm rechecking it. Toyota's US sales bounced back in March as substantial discounts helped to win back customers who had been shaken by the firm's mass safety recalls. And when it comes to informal, did you see Toyota's sales figures? Looks like the discounts have actually worked. So this is informal, and you can't use this in a business presentation. You can't use this in a managing board's meeting. In a board meeting, you can produce this sentence. It would sound odd. That's why formal and informal is so very important. And here the standard of correctness is higher. Some things are considered correct or at least acceptable. So more than the concept of correct and incorrect, it's better to consider it as acceptable or not acceptable. It's acceptable or unacceptable, but this is acceptable where in informal, and some things are acceptable in formal. So in informal English, something is acceptable but wrong in formal English. So in some situations, when you produce a sentence in speech, these are correct because you are producing informal language. That's why most of the time it's said that in spoken English, you don't need much exposure to your grammar learning and also to your grammar skill, because grammar skill isn't much needed for spoken English because that is informal, na? Their grammar mistakes are not actually given much focus. The grammar mistakes are ignored there. But in formal English, there you must follow the proper ways of producing a sentence. So how it is? Here I have some examples. I've made less mistakes. This is for informal situations. But when you come to formal, it would be I've made fewer mistakes. She's liking it. She likes it. As you know, you won't you can put ing with like. I have a discussion over it. You may check it there in my previous videos, and the discussion is there also in tense, where I have discussed about tense. Now there you'd find this. I feel real tired. So it's also real. This word is not used properly here. It would be I feel really tired. You did good. So here also this word good is used informally. In formal sentences it would be well. So that's how it goes. A huge number of words and phrases are used mainly in informal English. For example, nevertheless, to disclose, etc. You'd find them only in formal English. You won't find them in informal. In informal situations, you can't use them. The list is longer. You might check it in my Telegram channel. I'll put the list there in Telegram channel, and from there you can check it. Okay. Next, a huge number of words and phrases are used mainly in informal English, like dude, freaking, oh, nope, yep. So all these words are used for informal. They are used in informal situations, and you can't use them in formal situations. So that's how it goes. That's how the formal and informal, these two concepts work. And here we must have a very detailed knowledge of these words and situations. So we must work well to get these situations properly. And that is the concept of formal and informal English. So here, when we come, many, but not all phrasal verbs are avoided in formal English. So when we are in formal English, we avoid most of the phrasal verbs, but there are many phrasal verbs which are also used in formal English. So most of the phrasal verbs are ignored. Phrasal verbs are used frequently in informal English. When we are in informal English, phrasal verbs are very much frequent. Like what? For example, in informal situations, people usually say found out instead of discovered. So this is very much essential to learn. You are using phrasal verbs, and these are informal. What? Like this sentence. Found out. I have found out something. So this found out is informal, and also when you come to formal, you would say I have discovered something. So here discovered is used for formal situations, and found out, it's for informal. So that's how formal and informal, formality and informality go in English language. So this is what you must learn here for producing successful English sentences. Obviously situational and relevant. Actually, what does this formal and informal things do? It actually makes our language relevant. We have to get relevant when we speak, when you produce a sentence. Without this relevancy, actually these sentences are worthless. To make them worthy, we have to use them with their proper situations. So how words and phrases are sometimes pronounced in a shortened and simplified way. That is, I'm doing fine, roots up, etc. In many occasions, I have found my students to do these things. They also produce sentences in shortened form in essay. And they just don't consider that we are in something of formal writing. It's not informal, it's formal. And in formal writing, we are using shortened or simplified forms of words. That's a sheer mistake. And when I ask them not to do this, when I strike it out, they question me, why sir? It's written in books. But they haven't considered that in books it's written, but obviously that's in a story. There, some informal conversation, personal conversation is going on and it has been put. So there lies the difference between something formal and informal, which most of the time we fail to register. And because of this failure, our language sounds odd. If you don't want to sound odd, if you don't want to sound odd in your English sentences, obviously you must remember the formal and informal ways of producing sentences. It's so very important. If you have any question, you may write them down in the comment below, because I'm not shifting to comment now. I'm trying to complete whatever I have to discuss here, and after this I'll go to the comment. If you have any question, I'll obviously clear those doubts. Could you synopsize the differences? Yes, this is very much important. We have talked about differences, what we have here or not, but here we must make a synopsis. So what we have learned so far. Informal and formal, a table is made here. So first it's informal English. Informal English is conversational. And here you must add personal level. It's personal and it's obviously not at all formal. So personal conversation, these are informal, whereas official, literary, academic, these situations are formal English. They demand formal English. Again, improvised. Informal English is improvised, whereas formal English is edited. Then in informal English we produce simple sentences, and in formal English we produce complex sentences. So these are the basic differences, and that's all folks. We have these things to learn from formal and informal sentences. And obviously you may like it. If you like it, you'd press the thumb icon, the like button, and also you may share it with your friends or those who really want to learn something in this language, in English. And you have the comment section, and obviously if you find everything worthy, you might subscribe this channel with notification on, and clicking the bell on to work. You have to accept all the notifications so that you get everything here. So let's check what's there in comment section. If you have something to discuss here, actually we are making progress in our discussion of this formal and informal English. So here we are. We have already spent half an hour regarding our discussion of formal and informal English. If you want something to take from this, obviously you have your comment section, have your comment here, and I would obviously answer each and everything that you ask me. And if you want some extra discussion regarding formal or informal, you'd have to visit my Telegram channel, and there in Telegram channel I put everything whatever I have discussed here in detail. And on the other hand, if you have some special things to learn from here, you may ask me regarding English grammar or language. I'll try my best to prepare some video on it or to go live for this. So we have enough of this document of this discussion today, and enough documents would be there in my Telegram channel with the link in the description. So you may follow this, found out whatever I have put there, and we would be there live and exclusive in Shiksha Mantra in some other occasions very, very soon. So till then, bye bye, happy learning. Oi.